Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I kept a running log from the first night we reached Seguin Island Light Station, and I am still writing now, 300 days after the outbreak began. My name is Daniel Cruz. I was an electronics technician with the United States Coast Guard before I changed jobs to dockside communications support in Portland, Maine. When the coastal towns filled with the infected and the ferries shut down, a lighthouse made rational sense. Height for visibility, solid walls, a small footprint to defend, and a way to keep distance from mainland traffic. We were not the first to think of it, but we were the first to reach this one and hold it. Seguin sits at the mouth of the Kennebec River, about 2.5 miles offshore. Granite foundation on a steep island with a white conical tower, the keeper's quarters, a fog signal building, and a short tramway slope where a rail used to carry supplies from the landing cove up to the top. The light has one of the few first-order Fresnel lenses still in service in the United States. I knew that from a museum brochure once. It mattered later because the big lens and clockwork room were designed for constant maintenance, something I could adapt for power and signal work. We were 6 on the first day, me, Maya Singh, an emergency room nurse from Biddeford, Tomoko Sato, a mechanical engineer who used to contract for a wind turbine company, Benjamin Benji O'Rourke, a lobsterman from Phippsburg, Carla Jimenez, a high school science teacher from Bath, and Alan Pierce, a retired lighthouse historian who had volunteered here every summer. We left shore in a 21-foot center console that Benji owned, a Seaway hull with a Yamaha outboard rated at 115 horsepower. We carried jerry cans stabilized with additive, a cooler of ice and vacuum-packed haddock, a set of waterproof duffels, and a milk crate of safety gear, handheld VHF radios with spare lithium-ion packs, an ACR EPIRB, Solus flares, Type 1 life jackets, a throw ring, and a manual pump. We brought hand tools, a small inverter generator, a coil of rope, a bosun's chair, 4 rolls of heavy plastic sheeting, and a few simple defensive tools locked in cases. We said little on the run out. The fog set in at mid-morning and stayed. We kept to 5 knots along a GPS track Benji trusted, horn blowing too long every couple of minutes, and the radar, one of the last luxuries on that boat, showed only the outline of the island, a slow, bright fan ahead. Landing at Seguin is always the hard part, even in normal times. There is a small cove on the south side with a stone landing and iron rings set into the rock. The swell wraps around the island and rebounds, so you time the step to the ladder, not the ladder to you. We made 2 runs to move the gear. Alan led us up the steep path that parallels the old tram rails, a narrow cut where ferns hide wet rock. The keeper's house door was locked. Alan produced a key from a chain he wore under his shirt. Inside, we found the 2-story quarters dry and dusty. The light's beacon had power from a solar-charged battery bank that an automatic controller maintained. The foghorn was off. The Coast Guard had automated it a few years back and only activated it when visibility dropped below a set threshold, which it had. It moaned once while we were still catching our breath. I pulled the control panel and set the foghorn to manual silence. Sound carries, and we did not need to be the loudest thing on the water. The first 72 hours were a sequence of practical tasks. We inventoried every room. Alan had kept spreadsheets printed on clipboards for summer volunteers. Fuel for the mower, cleaning supplies, spare bulbs, brass polish, and lamp oil for the museum displays. We mapped the septic line, tested the well pump. Salt intrusion had made the well brackish years ago, so the station relied on rainwater collected from the metal roof into a cistern. The gutters were clogged with needles. Tomoko and I cleaned them and screened the downspouts with stainless mesh. Carla designed a water protocol. All collected rain went into the masonry cistern. Then we pulled in batches through a 2-stage sediment and carbon system into food-grade drums. We had ceramic gravity filters as a backup and a small stock of chlorine for shock treatment. We set a ration at 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and cooking, plus 1/2 gallon per person for washing on days when the rain cooperated. Power took more time. The tower's light had its own dedicated solar array and sealed AGM batteries. The house had an older set of panels mounted on the south gable. The charge controller still functioned. The inverter hummed and powered a few critical outlets. We kept the generator for tools and emergency charging when the fog lingered. I wired a simple bus for our handhelds, headlamps, and a marine band base radio that I mounted in the kitchen. Alan knew where the coax line exited the old radio room and where an antenna mast had stood. We reused a section of steel conduit and lashed a new VHF whip to the chimney with stainless band clamps. The first time I keyed the base on channel 16 and said, "Seguin Station," standing by, it echoed in the empty room with the same weight as my uniform days, except no one answered. Benji set the fishing plan on day 4. He read the tide tables for Popham Beach and Stage Island. The range on that stretch of coast is about 8 to 9 feet on an average tide, more on spring tides. Slack at the mouth of the Kennebec can be 10 to 20 minutes off from the tables depending on wind. He rigged 2 medium spinning rods with 40-pound braid and fluorocarbon leaders. We had tins, bucktail jigs, and a box of circle hooks for bait rigs. For hand lines off the rocks, he cut down 2 sections of PVC into spools. He taught Carla and me how to cast parallel to the wash for mackerel and how to work a jig off the bottom for pollock. He set a wire trap in the landing cove for green crabs, not as food, but as bait. When he hooked the first striped bass from the ledge below the fog signal building, he measured it against a ruler taped to a board. "Keep her," he said out of habit, then glanced toward the mainland and let out a slow breath. We ate it that night, sprinkled with salt and dried herbs from a jar we found in the pantry, cooked on a cast iron pan over a small propane burner. The first storm hit on day 7. A nor'easter in October is ordinary here, but at the time our nerves were not ordinary. We tied off everything with bowlines and clove hitches. The generator, the ladders, the skiff, the spare fuel, the bins. We added screws to window frames and braced one door with a 2x4 we ripped from an old workbench. The barometer dropped. We listened to the weather radio on the marine band. Sustained winds 30 to 40 knots, gusts higher, wave heights 8 to 12 feet offshore, building. The light stayed on. The lens rotated smoothly, its prisms throwing a white flash every few seconds across a field of rain. The thunder never reached us because the wind consumed it. We learned our first big lesson then. The lighthouse is strong, but the island is isolation, and the mainland is a long way away when the water stacks on rocks. Days became a schedule. Morning checks at 7 a.m. Water, battery voltages, weather notes, a sweep for leaks. Breakfast rotation. Midday work. Maintenance, fishing, line drying, repairs. Watch posts assigned in 2-hour blocks from the house porch and the lantern gallery of the tower. We used a handheld anemometer and a digital thermometer on the north wall to record conditions. Records gave us something to do that was measurable. Evenings, we used a single 20-watt LED bulb in the kitchen to save power. We set quiet hours at 9:30 p.m. and night watch in the tower until 1:30 a.m. with another check at 4:30 a.m. Discipline is freedom in a place like that. It keeps minds focused. Contact with shore stayed limited. We heard occasional calls on VHF 16, then nothing. I scanned AIS targets with a small USB receiver jerry-rigged to a laptop to see any ship transponders still pinging. Cargo ships held to sea. tugs clustered in harbors. Recreational targets vanished. On day 11, a ferry called for assistance on 16 and then went silent mid-sentence. We did not discuss it. We logged it. On day 17, a short broadcast came in with a clear voice. Mariners in the Kennebec area, avoid Bath Iron Works. Do not approach bridges. If you are on the water, stay offshore, and do not make landfall unless you have a safe harbor. The voice did not identify the transmitter. That night, Alan asked me to switch the base to Channel 68 to scan the local traffic channels used by fishermen. It was quiet. Our defensive plan matched the terrain. The island top is a small plateau. The approach from the south landing rises in a narrow cut. The north and east faces drop in steep, broken ledges. We focused on the landing. We did not want to signal with light or noise, so we made passive barriers. We cut spruce deadfall and lashed it across the lower path with cordage and stainless wire we salvaged from the tram rails. We placed a ladder halfway up the slope that we could pull at night. We built a simple gate at the top from 2x3s and galvanized hinges. We removed loose stones near the path to reduce trip hazards. We set a small motion sensor on a low-power setting at the mid-slope bend, linked to a silent light on the kitchen shelf. For direct defense, we kept a small set of legal firearms and non-lethal tools locked and logged, with ammunition counted and stored. When we drilled safety and discipline first. Muzzle awareness, ear protection, and clear fields of fire. For day-to-day security, we relied on height, distance, and early warning. Maya managed health. She inventoried every bandage, sterile pad, and medication by name and expiration date. She set a no bare feet rule inside to reduce cuts. She hung a laminated hand-washing checklist by the sink and set a bleach dilution chart for surfaces. She established a 3-bucket system for washing dishes: wash, rinse, sanitize. She taught us how to recognize early signs of dehydration and heat stress even in cool weather, because work in wind pulls moisture without notice. She designed a quarantine plan in the oil room under the tower. If anyone showed symptoms of any infection, that person would isolate with a designated kit and radio, with a shift watch through the door. It sounded strict, and it was. We all agreed to it. Day 23, during a morning watch, I saw a small sail moving slow along the western horizon, a white triangle barely distinct from the fog. I called it down to the kitchen, and we all stepped into the wind and watched. The sail stayed steady for 20 minutes, then tacked and disappeared into the mist. The AIS did not show it. Benji said the helm looked unsure by the way the sail luffed after each tack. We discussed signaling, then did not. The risk of drawing others was too high. Afterward, we were quiet over coffee. Decision pressure builds in silence. The first serious supply issue was fuel. The generator used about 1/10 of a gallon per hour at a light load, and we avoided running it except during battery equalization days or when we needed power tools. The outboard on the skiff was the larger draw. Benji wanted to fish farther from the rocks during calm mornings for larger school fish and to set a gill net for a short drift, but even short runs consumed fuel, and fuel meant runs to the mainland. Our rain capture was working, but food staples were finite. We had canned goods from the keeper's pantry and what we brought, but flour, rice, yeast, and cooking oil had limits. By day 31, we organized our first planned mainland resupply. We chose Popham Beach State Park because Benji knew every cut and sandbar there, and we could land at a back cove near the old Fort Popham Granite Works. The tide for that day gave us a morning high at 9:12 a.m. We would leave at 7:30 a.m. to ride the ebb and return with the flood by early afternoon before the afternoon sea breeze stiffened. The plan was to tie off in the cove, move as a group inside the fort grounds, and check the ranger maintenance building first. Maya drew up a checklist. water containers, canned goods, medical supplies, batteries, hand tools, gaskets, engine oil, fishing weights, rope, bleach, and any charts or tide books. We agreed on no unnecessary items. We would not linger. We launched with the motor idling low. The inlet swell was modest. We ran a straight line across the mouth, then swung into the river with the flood tide. The Kennebec always feels alive, even on quiet days. On day 31, its banks felt different. The houses beyond the trees were still. The beach parking area had 2 vehicles parked at odd angles. The fort itself stood as it always had, with its granite blocks and archways. We beached in the cove on a line and set the boat anchor in a V with a stern line to keep the bow to the gentle swell. I kept the handheld radio on my chest rig and a whistle on a lanyard. We moved as a column with eyes out, hands free. The ranger building had an open side door. Inside, we found hand tools, a case of nitrile gloves, and a pallet with an empty spot where bottled water once sat. We took a 5-gallon jug, a box of contractor bags, a set of spare batteries, a coil of poly rope, and a bucket of fasteners. From the fort's caretaker closet, we took a pair of worn rain jackets and a box labeled event supplies that held a dozen tea lights and a manual can opener. In the parking lot, a state truck had a full-size spare. Tomoko checked the tires and shook her head. Wrong bolt pattern for our needs. We did not force any locked doors. We moved quickly and kept our voices low. On the walk back, we saw them. 3 figures on the road from the campground, moving at a steady, uncoordinated pace. We froze at the corner of a small shed. Maya breathed out and placed a hand on my arm. We did not need a reminder to keep distance. Benji pointed to the beach and traced a path with his finger. We did not run. We did not speak. We left gear that slowed us and kept only the essentials. The figures did not turn toward us. The wind favored the ocean and masked our scent and sound. At the cove, we pushed off, idled until we cleared the rocks, then brought the throttle up once we had water under the hull. On the ride out, no one looked back. We learned to measure days by work completed, not by the weight of events. That is how 300 days passed. Each week had its pattern, and we adapted it as seasons shifted. Winter brought ice on the steps and a new hazard on the path. We sanded the slope with crushed rock from a pile near the fog signal room. We hung windcloth along the porch to break the gusts. We moved the sleeping quarters to the 2nd floor, where the house stayed a bit warmer. We rotated night watch in shorter blocks to keep minds alert. We rationed propane and shifted to the wood stove for cooking whenever the wind allowed. Alan showed us how the keepers used to bank a fire and vent smoke to keep soot off the walls. January taught us about isolation more than any lesson before it. Storms stacked, and we had one stretch of 6 days when the fog did not lift and the wind never dropped below 20 knots. The batteries ran low. We used the generator at midday for exactly 90 minutes to bring them back to safe levels and shut it down on schedule. We spoke in short sentences. I took apart the old clockwork that once rotated the lens, not to use it but to learn from it. Its brass gears were heavy and smooth. The weight drum had held a long line that used gravity to keep the lens turning. To save power during the worst of the overcast, I built a manual winder for the ventilator fan in the lantern room from scrap wood, then replaced it with a small hand-crank dynamo meant for camping gear that I scavenged from the museum cabinet. At the end of that week, when the cloud finally broke open to blue and the panels started delivering power again, Maya smiled for the first time in 3 days. Food planning changed in winter. Stripers left. We shifted to pollock, cusk, and occasional cod when we worked deeper rocks from the skiff using a short drift on calm days. We set a priority to avoid overfishing our immediate ledges. Benji kept a notebook with GPS waypoints and a rotation schedule. From the pantry, we stretched rice and oats. We baked with a sourdough starter that Carla kept alive in a jar tucked near the stove. She was strict about flour use, but allowed weekly bread days to keep morale. She also started a small indoor grow on a shelf under the south window. Scallions from cut roots, lettuce in shallow trays, and herbs. We kept the shelf watered with a measured cup. The green was a victory out of proportion to its calories. We did not count the infected as enemies. We counted them as a condition to manage like weather or tide. The real threat to our stability was uncertainty and the decisions it forced. On day 112, a motor yacht came into view from the south. White hull, 40 feet, flybridge, twin props. It circled at a distance, engine note rising and falling unevenly. We stood on the lantern gallery and watched without waving. It passed west, then north, then out. 2 days later, a small skiff drifted onto the rocks on the east side, empty except for a coil of rope and a plastic crate. We waited until high slack, then Tomoko and I went down the east path with lines on our belts and pulled it to a safer ledge. We checked it for anything useful and found a first aid kit with sterile saline, a flashlight with working batteries, and a small tool roll. We pushed the skiff back off on the next flood to keep the landing area clear. We did not keep the hull, it was too damaged to maintain. We logged the items and moved on. Spring returned with fog and new visitors. On day 190, during a late afternoon when the tide was at half flood and the wind was calm, we heard a whistle from the cove. Not a foghorn, a person's whistle. 2 short, 1 long. We froze, then gathered at the top of the path behind the barrier we had built. 2 people stood below, hands visible, a woman and a teenager. The woman called up quietly that they were from Arosik, a few miles up the river, and that their boat had low fuel. She said they saw our signal mirror last week and had aimed for the island on a calm day. She asked for water and a small amount of gas, and she offered a sealed bag of dry goods in exchange. We had prepared for this situation in theory, but not in practice. Our rules said we would not bring unknown visitors into the house unless we had a quarantine plan and a clear reason. At the same time, we were not closed to the world. We agreed to a shoreline exchange with a rope line. We lowered 2 jugs of water and 1 gallon of fuel in a crate. They left a sealed bag with dry beans, salt, and 2 jars of homemade pickles wrapped in newspaper dated from the first month of the outbreak. We asked for news. They said the bridge into Bath had been blocked by vehicles and that a small group had set up a checkpoint near a boatyard farther up the river. They said they relied on clamming and small nets and had kept to their side channels to avoid attention. They thanked us and left on a slow plane toward the west channel, keeping to center water to avoid the bars. We watched until they were out of sight, then pulled our ladder and checked each other's faces. We spoke little. None of us slept well that night. The interchange with Arosik changed our mindset. We no longer assumed we were unseen. We adjusted our signaling plan. During mornings with clear visibility, we still used a small mirror to flash a prearranged pattern towards the sea lanes for any large ship that might be in range, but we kept it brief. At dusk, we kept the light pattern steady and standard to avoid attention, and we did not use any non-standard flashes. For audio, we kept the base radio on scan but did not transmit except in emergency or to test on low power. We reviewed our protocols around the landing and set times each week when we tested the motion sensor, the gate, and the rope lines without discussion. Morale work is as real as mechanical work. Around day 200, Carla proposed we build a small library from the books in the museum office and the few we had brought. We divided reading nights by subject: navigation basics, plant identification, first aid, tool use. We read aloud for 30 minutes after dinner, then had a short discussion. Alan kept the lens cleaner than any museum would have required, and he started short talks about lighthouse history. He described how keepers had recorded barometer readings and sea states twice a day, how they had scrubbed galleries to keep salt from corroding iron, and how, in winter, they had used hot brine to melt ice on steps. Those details gave our day's shape beyond necessity. Tension over leadership surfaced slowly and honestly. I defaulted to communications and power. Maya managed health. Benji handled fishing and boat operations. Tomoko led maintenance and structural work. Carla handled education and planning documents. Alan maintained the tower and grounds with a reverence that fed our discipline. When decisions crossed lines, we discussed them in the kitchen with a written agenda. Still, the stress of rationing pressed on us. On day 221, Maya proposed cutting cooking oil by a third to ensure supply through summer if we could not obtain more. Benji argued for the calories and the role of fats in work capacity. The discussion lasted 2 evenings. We settled on a modest reduction and a trial of rendering fish trimmings for additional cooking fat. It was not pleasant work. It provided a small supplement. The process produced a smell that carried downwind. We scheduled it for days when the wind direction pushed scent out to sea. On day 240, we made a second mainland run, this time farther up the river to a small marina at Georgetown that Benji knew. We chose a day with a light northwest wind and a midday high tide. We ran the skiff at moderate RPM to conserve fuel. The marina docks had shifted, but still held. In the yard, we found a locked shed. Tomoko picked the padlock with a rake and tensioner from a kit she had brought as a leftover from a lock shop class. Inside were oil filters, engine oil, spark plugs, and a half-dozen small craft items. We took 2 quarts of oil and 1 set of plugs that matched our outboard. In a side locker, we found a weathered cardboard box with a new impeller kit for a Yamaha water pump. That find alone could extend the life of our engine by months. Outside, we moved slowly among the racks and found an old fiberglass dinghy with an intact set of oars. We debated bringing it. We decided to tow it home to use as a backup in case the outboard ever failed. Towing slowed us and increased fuel use, but redundancy was worth it. We returned on the first of the flood, nose into small chop, and reached the landing without incident. Summer on the island brought visitors of a different kind. Birds, seals on the offshore rocks, and occasional distant kayaks that never came close. The longer light helped power, and the garden shelf produced more than we expected. Carla improvised a larger tray with driftwood sides lined with plastic sheeting, and we grew microgreens for salads and a small amount of radish in a 5-gallon bucket. We built a solar still as a test project using black plastic and a collection basin, but it produced too little for the work. The lesson mattered more than the water. On flat mornings, we set lobster traps not to sell but to harvest a few legal lobsters for protein. Benji scrupulously returned egg-bearing females and undersized ones. We rotated trap placement to avoid overpressure. Our goal was maintenance, not consumption at all costs. Conflict returned with heat. Shielded from the mainland's immediate pressures, our minds generated new ones. Benji wanted to attempt a trip inland to look for bulk staples at a small wholesaler he knew near Wiscasset. He argued that our current stores put us at risk if fishing ever dipped for a week due to weather and if rain failed for a stretch. Maya opposed the trip based on health risks and the potential for injury far from care. Tomoko leaned toward the trip for mechanical supplies. Alan opposed, based on the principle that the lighthouse was a safe position and that every mile inland increased exposure. Carla asked me to break the tie. I did not take that lightly. We set constraints for a mission profile and then evaluated if the mission could be executed under those constraints without excessive risk. The constraints were clear: daylight only, a strict fuel budget with reserve, a 2-person shore party with the other 4 on watch at the lighthouse, No entry into enclosed spaces without ventilation. No firing of any signal devices unless life-threatening circumstances. A hard abort time set to 2 hours after arrival on site. A pre-planned route using back roads known to Benji from deliveries years earlier. The target, a mid-sized warehouse on a side street that might still have pallets of grain, rice, or oil. The goal? Filled 2 large dry bags and 1 plastic bin, nothing more. We debated for 2 nights and set a date tied to a high tide at dawn with a stable forecast. Light and variable winds, small seas, and a barometer steady at 30.10 inches. We left at 5:40 a.m. Benji and I took the skiff. We carried the handheld radio on channel 72 for team coordination, with the base scanning and standing by. We brought a bolt cutter, a battery angle grinder, and a set of masks. We wore work gloves and eye protection. We had a simple first aid kit on each of us. The run upriver was quiet. Ospreys stood on old channel markers. At the boat launch near the target town, we tied off and moved along a railroad bed to avoid the main road. The warehouse was a low concrete block building with a steel roll-up door. The side door had a glass panel and a deadbolt. We approached slow, watched for movement, then covered the glass with tape before breaking it to reduce noise. Inside, the air was stale and warm. We propped both doors open to ventilate. The back shelving held paper products and cleaning agents. The middle held boxes of plastic kitchenware. The far aisle held food. Institutional-size cans of tomatoes, beans, and fruit. 50-pound sacks of rice, and cases of cooking oil in plastic jugs. It was more than we could safely carry. We kept discipline. We loaded 2 sacks of rice into our bin, split into smaller bags to reduce back strain, and 3 jugs of oil. We grabbed 2 cases of canned beans and 1 case of salt. We stayed within our limit. We were ready to leave when I saw a small shelf of medical supplies, gauze, sterile saline, and an unopened case of disposable masks. I called the base quietly and asked Maya if we could add weight for the masks and gauze. She said yes, masks and 1 bundle of gauze, and then we had to leave. On our exit, we heard movement outside. Not a crowd, a single person, walking unsteady along the rail bed. We froze inside the shadow of the door. The person moved past, a thin man in a t-shirt, head tilted, gaze unfocused. We did not engage. He kept walking. When he was 50 yards beyond, we slipped out the opposite door and moved the other way to the boat, staying in cover. At the launch, the water was calm. We pushed off and motored to mid-river before breathing out. On the run down, the outgoing tide added speed, and we reached Seguin with our fuel reserve intact. The team pulled the ladder. We passed the bin up in a chain. We did not speak until everything was stowed and logged. Then we ate lunch in quiet relief. The inland run did what Benji had predicted. It gave us caloric stability. It also did what Maya had predicted. It increased our risk even in success, because it changed our tolerance for future runs. To counterbalance that, we set a rule after. No inland runs more than once per month, and only when specific items were flagged as at risk. We also set a rule for communication with the aerosic group. We would maintain a passive aid posture. Water and limited fuel in exchange for specific items we defined in advance, such as medical supplies, a spare line, or charts. We would not trade for currency or items we did not need. We would not exchange names or home locations beyond general area references. It was cold policy, but it kept boundaries clear. News continued to come in sparse fragments. On day 280, a shortwave voice broadcast came through in the evening on a frequency Alan used to listen to for weather ships. The speaker read a list of coastal installations that were self-sustaining and open to vessels by appointment only. The list included a few lighthouses and life-saving stations in other states. It did not include ours. The message advised mariners to avoid major estuaries unless they had specific invitations, and to keep lights shielded at night to avoid drawing unwanted attention. It ended with a call sign I did not recognize. I logged the frequency and time and listened the next 2 nights, but the voice did not return. On day 296, a late-season storm blew in from the southeast with a heavier swell than the forecast suggested. The swell wrapped into the landing and lifted the skiff against the rock despite our lines. We had to make a quick decision. Either cut the stern line and risk the skiff banging or pull it out entirely. We pulled. The 6 of us hauled on the bowline together between sets, and we slid the skiff onto a patch of kelp-slick stone, then heaved on 3 to bring it above the surge line. The move strained our backs and scraped the hull gel coat. We saved the boat. We spent the next day sanding a few gouges and patching with a small repair kit from the museum maintenance closet. That event reminded us that even without human pressure, the island demands respect every day. Day 300 is not a celebration. It is a number that marks endurance and the cost that comes with it. I recorded the morning. Wind southwest at 8 knots, visibility 3 miles with haze, barometer 29.92 steady, tide low at 6:18 a.m., high at 12:39 p.m. We split into pairs for the day's tasks. Benji and I set to check the lobster traps on the east side during the last of the flood. Tomoko and Carla repaired a gutter section that had worked loose. Maya cleaned and restocked the medical shelf and ran a small health workshop on sprains and strains. Alan polished the brass in the lantern room and checked the oil in the fan. We also planned to attempt a controlled signal at mid-afternoon. 3 short flashes with a mirror toward the southeast to test a prearranged pattern we had agreed on with the Arosic group for non-urgent information exchange. At 1:10 p.m., we moved to the gallery level with the mirror. The sea was a broad field of dim light. We contrasted the mirror with a dark cloth and flashed 3 short bursts, then waited, then repeated. 15 minutes later, a faint mirror return flickered on the horizon, too far to be Arosic and not in the right direction. We all saw it. It repeated twice more, then stopped. It could have been a kayak group offshore or another station testing signals. We did not know. We did not respond a 3rd time. We recorded it. That evening, each of us walked the perimeter alone at different times before night watch. The route is short. South path to the bend, fence line to the east edge, tower base, and back to the porch. It gives a person a way to think in motion. After dinner, pollock stew with rice and a single jar of the Arosic pickles split 6 ways, we sat with the map and reviewed our next month's plan. We set a date window for a maintenance inspection of the tower exterior, using a bosun's chair and safety line to check for hairline cracks in the mortar and flaking paint that could invite water. We scheduled a garden tray restart with fresh potting mix we made by sifting old soil and mixing in crushed shell from a pile of mussels we had boiled earlier in the season. We created a red list of items that would trigger a mainland run. Engine oil below 2 quarts, cooking oil below 1 gallon, medical gauze down to 1 bundle, rice below 20 pounds, and fuel below a quarter of our store. Numbers keep panic in check. Night watch at the 300-day mark fell to me. I carried the handheld radio, a small red-lensed flashlight, a wool cap, and a logbook. I climbed the narrow cast-iron steps inside the tower, each step a wedge set into the wall, past the clockwork level to the lantern room. I checked the lens for salt, checked the vents, and stood outside on the gallery for a full minute to adjust my eyes before moving. The ocean made a low sound, the kind that fills rather than pierces. The mainland showed a few weak glows far off that might have been fires or might have been reflections. The stars were visible in pieces through haze. I counted breaths and picked out constellations by habit. I wrote the time and conditions in the log. I stood and listened for anything that did not match wind and water. That is what survival in a lighthouse is. Long attention to ordinary sounds, with rare interruptions that matter a lot. Weeks earlier, we had argued about whether the lighthouse was a sanctuary or a trap. It is both. It gives position awareness and distance, and it also reduces options. The way to live with that is to convert reduced options into a set of known procedures. When the infected appear on a far ledge, we do not improvise. We follow the perimeter protocol and let time handle distance. When the foghorn would normally sound, we prevent it and rely on other tools. When the rain does not come, we reduce usage without waiting. When supplies run low, we do not panic. We either plan a run under strict rules or we adjust diet. That is not dramatic. It is effective. I will write down a few of those procedures here because I think lists outlast stories. Water protocol, weekly gutter cleaning, cistern lid check, intake screen inspection, sediment filter flush every 2 weeks, carbon filter replacement every 6 weeks if usage is high, ceramic elements scrubbed every 2 months, chlorine shock when algae count increases or after a bird event on the roof, power protocol, morning panel inspection, wipe salt film 2 times per week, controller temperature check on hot days, equalization charge once every 30 days in clear sun, generator oil check at 50-hour intervals, spare spark plug inventory at 3 units minimum, ventilation fans tested weekly, food protocol, fishing site rotation by waypoint, no net longer than 30 minutes in the water, traps checked on a 2-day schedule, throwback undersized and egg-bearing lobsters, staple consumption tracked in a ledger, 1 fresh herb tray maintained for morale, health protocol, daily hand hygiene checks, weekly foot checks for blisters, quarterly review of medical inventory, quarantine plan rehearsed once per month, mental health breaks scheduled after tense events, security protocol, path barrier inspection each morning, ladder pull at dusk, motion sensor test on Tuesdays and Fridays, radio silence unless needed, mirror signals only within prearranged windows, clear fields of view from the porch and the east edge trimmed monthly. I describe details because that is what saved us, not one-time heroics. I have seen heroics. They burn fuel. Procedures generate stability. Even when we had to act quickly, like the skiff pulled during the southeast swell, we were acting within a framework of practiced moves. The same framework applied when we made our inland run. The same framework will apply when we choose to contact a larger station if we ever confirm one that matches our values. As the 300 days begin, our decisions narrow again. Fuel is lower than we prefer. The garden trays need new soil inputs. The fish runs will shift with fall, and storms will increase again. The aerosic group may ask for more. We will have to choose whether to expand our circle or keep it tight. The lighthouse is solid, but a lighthouse cannot protect a person from loneliness. That part is managed by structure and by small acts. Bread day, a short reading, a walk around the perimeter at dusk, a lens polished until it reflects a face clearly. Maya has started a training calendar for all of us that repeats every 60 days. It includes wound care refreshers, lifting technique with a rope and pulley to prevent back injury during boat hauls, reading tide curves and predicting slack, and a drill for moving an injured person down the tower stairs with a blanket and 2 poles. She says practice is medicine. She is right. Tomoko has begun a survey of every crack in the tower masonry with a micrometer and a notebook, noting expansion and contraction with temperature. She says structures communicate if you record their language. She is right. Carla tests water samples with strips and keeps a weekly pH and chlorine log, noting patterns with rainfall. She says trends prevent surprises. She is right. Alan revises the visitor brochures in pencil to reflect the present, not as a public handout, but as a record of how keepers in this time handled their watch. He says history is maintenance at the scale of decades. He is right. Benji rebuilds the pull start cord on the outboard before it frays. He says you fix small things before they become large ones. He is right. I check radio coax for salt and antenna base for looseness, because communication systems fail at the connection points more often than they fail in the cable. I am not always right, but I am consistent. We will not pretend the lighthouse is perfect. On a hot August day, the flies can drive a person to the edge of patience. On a cold January morning, your hands can go numb before you reach the tower door. On a foggy June stretch, everything feels damp and slow. But the metrics that matter are clear. Clean water, sufficient calories, warm sleep, early warning, and a plan you can recite at 2 a.m. We have those. 300 days after the outbreak, the lighthouse stands. The lantern still throws its measured light across the water. In a place without schedules, we built our own. In a time without easy safety, we built practical safety. The island is still a sanctuary and a constraint, but it is our chosen constraint. Tomorrow at 6:30 a.m., we will descend to the landing at low tide to check lines, confirm chafe gear is seated, and scrape a small patch of algae where the ladder meets the stone. At 8 a.m., we will eat oats with a pinch of salt and a few dried berries. At 9 a.m., we will test the motion sensor and log the battery status. At 10 a.m., Carla will plant a new tray of greens. At 11 a.m., Benji will check the traps. At noon, I will key the radio and perform a short, low-power test with the base on a secondary channel, then secure it. At 1 p.m., we will review the rope ladder and practice a lift. At 3 p.m., we will sit for 30 minutes and read. At 5:30 p.m., we will cook fish and rice. At 7 p.m., we will walk the perimeter, one by one, and listen to the water. At 10 p.m., I will climb the tower for watch. If a small boat appears at the edge of visibility tomorrow, we will follow our exchange plan and act with caution and respect. If a storm builds fast, we will secure and ride it out. If the radio carries a voice with a clear signal in clear terms, we will listen and consider. Until then, we will maintain the light, not as a symbol, but as a working device that helps us measure time, see distance, and keep focus. That is enough for now. 2 days after day 300, we adjusted our patrol route after noticing new erosion in the south path just below the first bend. The winter storms and spring runoff had undercut the edge of the soil, exposing a rim of rock with loose gravel that could slip under a boot. Tomoko designed a simple retaining approach using gabion baskets. We did not have prefab baskets, so we built them from welded wire panels we cut from a fence roll in the maintenance shed. We shaped them into rectangles, lined them with burlap sacks to hold small stones, and filled them with rock from the east ledge talus. We tied the baskets together with stainless wire and set them at a batter angle against the slope, then backfilled with smaller stone and soil. The fix held in the first rain. We extended the hand line along that section with a length of marine-grade rope and 2 anchor points epoxied into drilled holes. It is not pretty, but it is safe. We also improved our water capture. During one squall, we noticed the downspout on the north side overshot the cistern inlet when the wind blew hard from the southwest. We added a hinge deflector plate cut from a scrap of aluminum flashing, attached with 2 rivets and a piece of bicycle inner tube as a return spring. The plate now guides heavy flow into the inlet, even when gusts push it wide. Carla measured the gain during the next rain by placing a marked stick in the cistern inspection port. We captured roughly 10% more water during gusty periods. Small changes at the right place yield good returns. We rechecked the radio ground because corrosion had increased at the clamp where the grounding strap met the copper rod. I cleaned it with a wire brush, applied antioxidant compound, and retightened the clamp. I added a drip loop to the cokes to reduce water intrusion during heavy rain. On test, the standing wave ratio improved marginally. The difference is minor, but any improvement helps, especially if we need to transmit farther at some point. The larger issue is discipline in not transmitting unless necessary. The base remains on receive most of the time. Our handhelds stay on a local working channel at low power for island coordination only. In the second week past day 300, we planned a controlled training day that doubled as an inspection of the tower exterior. We set the bosun's chair for vertical access along the leeward side to check a hairline crack we had marked earlier. Safety for work at height on the tower is strict. We anchored a main line to the central iron column inside the tower and routed it out through a smooth-edged window opening with padding to prevent abrasion. The person in the chair wore a sit harness with a chest tether and a backup Prusik. A second person belayed from inside with gloves, and a third monitored from the ground. We coordinated with radios and a set of hand signals. Tomoko descended first and confirmed the crack was surface only. We cleaned it and sealed it with a lime-based mortar compatible with the historic stone. The entire evolution took 1 hour and 40 minutes, with a 15-minute rest at the midpoint. We logged it and scheduled a recheck in 30 days. Maya ran a concurrent drill in the keeper's house, a simulated ankle sprain and carry down the stairs using a blanket and 2 broom handles as a makeshift stretcher. The stair angle is steep and the turn at the landing is tight. The key lesson was to move slow and communicate. We practiced securing the injured person at knees and chest and keeping the head supported. We used the hand line we had installed months earlier on the stairwell studs as a stabilizer. After the drill, we reviewed and adjusted the hand line anchors, adding a second fastener at each stud. We continued to balance our goal of remaining unseen with the practical need to fish and maintain. Our fishing rules now include a silent window at dawn and dusk when we avoid loud activity near the landing to reduce the chance of attracting attention from any distant shore observers. During midday, when glare reduces visibility from shore, we perform most of our loud tasks: cutting wood, hammering nails, testing the generator. We keep these within a set time block to minimize the period of acoustic signature. It feels like overthinking, but in practice it builds habits that help us stay consistent. We are also preparing for a winter where the mainland may be less stable than last year. We have doubled our kindling supply, split to uniform size, and stored in bins with tight lids. We have checked the roof for loose fasteners and sealed a seam on the porch flashing with a bead of marine sealant. We have thaw buckets set aside for emergency water if the pump freezes. The buckets are marked and stacked near the stove with lids to prevent contamination. We have located and tested all our chemical light sticks as a backup to batteries, and we have stored them in a cool, dark place to extend life. Each night before quiet hours, we review a short checklist out loud. It takes 2 minutes: doors locked, ladder pulled, motion sensor armed, stove damped, generator off, lights out except for the single LED in the kitchen if needed, radio volume set to low, any medical concerns, any maintenance issues flagged, any items for tomorrow's plan. We do not skip it even when tired. A night checklist catches the small things that cause big problems at 3 a.m. At this point, the lighthouse is more than shelter. It is a system of systems, each with a person assigned and a log that anyone can read and understand. If something happens to one of us, the others can pick up the tasks. That redundancy is as important as the granite walls. The infected still exist on the mainland, and we still see movement on some days on far beaches through binoculars. But they are not the daily variable we manage. We manage weather, power, water, food, and the decisions that keep those stable. That is what survival looks like at 300 days. Not a dramatic stand, but repeated, careful work. If any future reader finds this log, the details may feel plain. That is by design. Write down wind speed. Write down barometer. Write down how many gallons of water entered the cistern after a storm, and how much you used that week. Write down when you changed the generator oil and what it looked like. Write down tension moments and vote outcomes. Write down your training schedule and when you skipped it and why. Write down what you saw on the horizon and what you decided not to signal. A lighthouse is a place for records. Records keep people honest with themselves. Tomorrow, we will scrape and repaint a small section of the porch railing. We will check the crab trap and rebait if needed. We will rotate the rice stores so the oldest is used first. We will test the EPIRB battery and place it back in its dry bag. We will check the dinghy tow eye for the hairline cracks and add a backing plate if we see any stress. We will read for 30 minutes. We will sleep. We will wake to the foghorns that do not sound and the waves that always do, and we will continue. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.